A bit overdue, but better late than never. Last year Brett sent me a question about deism, and he said this: in the deistic model, a world with a god or a world without a god looks the exact same. If God is a non-interventionist, in other words, when God is not intervening with the world, then there is no reason to believe he exists at all. Though we shouldn't, another difficult word, anthropomorphize, so humanize God, I find it very hard to believe that a divine being who created time, space and the universe would no longer care for his creation after he created it. And then Brett said, I would appreciate your thoughts on the topic. Do you know any other arguments against such a belief system? Thanks, Brett. Okay, first of all, we need to know what deism is. So, the deist believes in the existence of a God who is not personally involved in the things that happen in the universe or in the lives of people. Classical deism states that God made everything perfect, and as such nothing needs his personal intervention or attention. Deists go further by believing that because God doesn't interact with his creation, he doesn't interact with people either, meaning that all religious revelation is a human-made construction and as such inevitably false. Also, the fact that there is evil in the world is being used to prove their point that God isn't personal like the God Christians believe in. They say that the God of the Bible is being proposed to be loving and powerful, but in their view this contradicts the idea of evil. The Christian God should have prevented evil from coming into existence, they say. But since there is evil, they say, God is not all-loving and he is not all-powerful, leaving us with an impersonal, distant God who is limited by the laws of physics. Okay, so let's start with Brett's first point. If God doesn't interact with us, if he doesn't really care what we do, then nope, we have no reason to believe. However, this is only true when we are absolutely sure about the first statement, namely that God doesn't care. The deist already accepts the existence of God, so we do not have to go into that topic, right? You see, they pride themselves on their power to reason and their idea that their ideas are grounded purely on empirical facts. Although that sounds noble and smart, in fact, it is a lack of insight. They flippantly assume that God doesn't interact with his created world, and by doing so, they just moved to a theological discipline called philosophy. Their philosophical premise has no footing in their beloved empirical facts. I have done a video actually on the common consent argument, and this argument shows that although it is theoretically possible that millions of Christians are deceived in this belief, it doesn't seem likely. Now, I would throw in Pascal's wager. I wouldn't bet on not believing. Now I need to say that Pascal's wager came in a certain context, and I will not go into that right now. We will just take the wager like it sounds. Either there is God, there is no God, and the safest thing to do is believe there is one. Anyway, you see, if I already accepted the idea of the existence of God, and I would say that you can't really know him, I wouldn't take my own ideas for granted. If God never revealed himself to the world, there is no way to say whether you are safe in your position as an unbeliever. God might have decided he would hold you accountable anyway. So, even though Brett says if the deistic God is true, it doesn't really matter whether we believe or not, I wouldn't bet on it. I mean, because I might be wrong. Well, I might be right as well, but I might be wrong, and then I end up with a very angry God. Maybe. Anyway. Okay, now let us look at the second remark Brett made about humanizing God. And I think here Brett is really spot on. We should not make God into our own image, like the Greek did with their gods. Now we are created in God's image, not the other way around. But in that sense, we could reflect on God's character as well, right? Why would he go through so much trouble of making everything and then step aside and not even paying attention? I have friends who can paint pretty well. They make beautiful paintings. I mean, you should look at my drawings. I mean, never mind. Afterwards, they normally enjoy their creation, and rightly so. They look at it, and sometimes they add a little here and they add a little there to make it even more perfect. The only time when a painter doesn't want to see the painting is when the painter is very unsatisfied, disappointed, or maybe he's angry about something. But deists say that God created everything perfectly. So, why should he turn away from his work? It's just not very logical. Okay, so in the first 2 points I followed the arguments Brett made. Now I'll add some of my own ideas about why I believe deism is ultimately flawed. And the first thing that comes to my mind is the question about how smart the deistic God is. Okay, deists believe that their God is restricted by the laws of the universe. But how can this be? I mean, the creator of the world must be very smart, right? I mean, Einstein was, for example, a very intelligent man, and he wasn't even intelligent enough to create such a complex reality as the universe. Anyway, still, Einstein could always adjust his own calculations if he wanted to. Why? Well, because he wrote them down in the first place, and he could have changed his own writing. Now, that may have resulted in faulty formulas, but the point I try to make is that he was never a captive of his own writings. But the deists believe that God actually captured himself in his own creation. Why would God make a universe in which he was unable to participate? Is the deistic God really such a pudding head? That can't be, right? He is intelligent enough to create everything. Such an intelligent being wouldn't forget to bring the key of it all. But okay, maybe God doesn't want to intervene because he just enjoys watching the world go around. When I was a child, I had an aquarium. It couldn't hold water because it was leaking, so I used it to watch insects. I looked at them for hours. How fascinating to see the spider try to defend herself against the ants, who in turn were in constant state of war with the other insects. My childish behavior sounds very much like the behavior of the deistic God. Is he watching his creation killing each other without care? In that case, I prefer the biblical God. The theistic God, the biblical God who has a purpose for evil. First of all, let me be clear, I do not believe that the biblical God is the cause of evil. James chapter 1 verse 13 and 15, up to 15 says this: Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For temptation does not originate from God, but from our own flaws. For God cannot be tempted by what is evil, and he himself tempts no one. Now let me give you an example of how God uses evil for the better. In Acts 16, we see and we read that there was an earthquake that caused the prison doors to open and the bonds around each prisoner to fall off. And mostly earthquakes are no fun. They can cause loss of life and a lot of damage. And in my eyes, that's evil. And we mostly think that this is funny. We mostly think that God actually caused the earthquake. However, it might just be that, an earthquake. Just like the storm on the lake when Jesus was in the boat, right? Things like that happen. But God used this natural disaster to bring the Philippian jailer and his whole family to faith. Faith in Christ. Our God can even use natural disasters to bring about his eternal purpose. Okay, let's take a look at morality. If deism is true, morality would be relative since the deistic God doesn't reveal anything. Morality would be subject to our own thinking. What is good for me isn't necessarily good for you. But this can't be right either, because we know that there are absolutes within morality. Ask an atheist hard and long enough and they all admit that there must be some standard to which we measure our moral ideas. I actually also made 2 videos on this topic which you might want to watch. I put the links of all these videos in the description of this video, okay? Okay. Now I'm going to use a little bit of the apologetic technique called presuppositionalism. This technique basically states that only the Christian worldview can account for logic, morality, science, instruction and consciousness itself. No other worldview is coherent enough to do this. The presupposition is that God, the God of the Bible, is true and we cannot argue around this truth. So, deists hold their theological perspective based on reason, the complexity and apparent design of the universe, and that God is by definition incomprehensible and unknowable. But in the biblical worldview, we believe that all wisdom and all knowledge has to start with God himself. Have you ever, for example, witnessed animals who reason with each other like we humans do? No, of course not. Animals are not created in God's image. We are. Deism is man-centered because there is no revelation of God or his divine will, and cannot provide good reason because human reasoning is ultimately flawed. The biblical God designed and programmed us with an innate knowledge of all sorts of facts about himself. Romans 1 verse 20. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Every time we come to a conclusion about anything at all, we do so in faith that God, who made us, wired us correctly, and that the world he created cannot possibly contradict itself, because God cannot create things that cannot be created. For example, contradictions. And this is a huge problem for deists. They simply state that God cannot be known. But how do they know anything about God at all, and how can their ideas be justified using logic that God is not involved in the world? So, in order for humans to be able to know things, we must base our thinking on God's pre-programming of us. Everything we truly know, therefore, is based on God's providing us with an informational basis. So, To be short, if God doesn't exist or doesn't care about our well-being, and indeed many deists believe that he put evolution into action and withdrew from the scene after that, then we are not pre-programmed to do anything logical. All our actions, thoughts and behavior would be accidental, even when they appear to be pre-programmed. In a deistic world, we would not have any rational justification. Okay, so although I think, and I like to think of more reasons, that there are more reasons of why deism can't be right, I would like to shift the whole focus a little more on affirmation. So what do I mean? Well, you see, why would we argue against deism? Deism simply says that a supreme being created everything, and that this can be seen using reason and watching the natural world around us. Deism thus claims that there is no need for either faith or organized religion. Christianity is what we call a revealed religion, which says that God is real. And he has revealed himself primarily through his Son Jesus Christ, and also through the scriptures. In a sense, theism is a subset to a large degree of deism, and in turn Christianity is a subset of theism. I mean that without revelation you have deism to start with. But because we believe God revealed himself, we jump to the theistic group, and in this group we accept the revelation of Jesus Christ and we become Christian. John chapter 1 verse 18 says, "No man hath seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him." So, arguing against deism might prove not to be very beneficial, since it seems it is almost like arguing against the existence of God. And I know we try to prove that God is much more than what the deists claim, but we are walking on a very thin line here. I believe it would be better to argue in favor of Jesus Christ and the Christian faith as the most reflective of reality. You see, if you absolutely refute deism, you risk moving outside of theism and into agnosticism or even into atheism. And I think it would be better to see what deism and Christianity have in common and then tackle those issues where Christianity claims more than deism does. We need to tell people about Jesus. Getting to know Jesus would mean they would get to know the Father, because Colossians says this, "Who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions, principalities or powers or things, all things were created by him and for him, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist." So, what do you think about deism? Are there any other arguments against, or maybe you have good arguments for the idea of deism? Just let me know. Share your thoughts in the comment section of my Odyssey channel. You could, of course, also leave a comment on my BitChute or YouTube channels, but since I'm not very active there, you most likely won't receive a reply. You'll find also ways to support me in the description of this video, so go ahead, look at the description, or you could visit my website and read the transcript of this video. I always try to make the transcripts available in the Dutch and English language. Finally, I would like to invite you to follow me on my Odyssey channel. The platform Odyssey is based on a protocol called a library, which in turn is built upon blockchain technology. Library is a decentralized protocol, community driven and open source, meaning there is not just one company trying to force their ideas on you without you being able to contribute whatsoever. Videos that are uploaded through the library protocol are censorship free. If you want to start your own channel on Odyssey, you can also use my invitation in the description and we will both receive some free LBC. Anyway, enough for today. As always, thank you for watching, God bless you, and we see each other in the next video.
Thank you for watching this video. You can give me a thumbs up if you liked it. You can also subscribe to my channel, or even better, follow me on Odyssey. That way you will never miss a new video. You will find all the links in the description below.